Okay, so apologize for the delay. We're just, taking a minute to get organized here. Um, and this morning, I want to, finish up the unit that we've had on mystical experiences and practices in the time of Tzvat, and want to share with you one of the really classic texts from this period. Which is from one of the earlier mystics, in the 12th and 13th century, Isaac of Akko. And it's just a really classic text, right? About, mystical experience and how it might change a person. So here is this teaching from Isaac of Akko. And I would say I include this in the piece from, Tzvat in the 16th century because it didn't really have much influence until it was quoted in the 16th century in one of the classic books, Eliyahu Davidus Reshit Chochmah, the beginning of wisdom. So here is the piece. One day, a princess emerged from a bathhouse. And one of these Nochschleppers, one of these idle men who was standing there, saw her. And he gave this big, deep sigh, like, ugh, who might give this beautiful and powerful woman to me that I might have my will with her? This guy is, he's maybe not the most refined individual, if you know what I mean, right? But the princess overhears his remark, which was probably not intended for him. And she says to him, "It will come to pass in the graveyard, but not here." Now, when he heard these words, he rejoiced, for, misunderstanding her meaning, he took her to mean he should go to the graveyard and wait for her there. And that when she would come to him, he could do with her as he wished. This, was not her intention. Rather, she meant to say that there all were equal, great and small, young and old, despised and honored. But here it could not be, for she is a princess, and one of the masses could not possibly approach her. So what does he do? He goes to the graveyard, and he sits there, and he is constantly thinking of joining with her, always thinking of her form. Because of his great desire only for her, he removed his thoughts from everything else that was sensual, concentrating only on her form and beauty. Day and night, he sat there in the graveyard. There he ate and drank, and there he slept, saying to himself, okay, if she doesn't come today, for sure tomorrow. He did this for many days. And because of his separation from the objects of sensation and the exclusive attachment of his thought to one object and his complete concentration and total longing, his soul was separated from sensual things and became attached only to that which can be perceived by the mind, until it became separated from all sensual things, including the woman herself, and he communed with God. After a short time, he cast off all sensual things and desired only the divine intellect, and he became a perfect servant and a holy man of God, until his prayer was heard and his blessing was beneficial to all passers-by, so that all the merchants and horsemen and foot soldiers who passed by came to him to receive his blessing. until his fame spread far about. A man who does not desire a woman is like a donkey, or even less than one. In other words, from the physical, one may apprehend the worship of God. So, through concentrating on this physical desire, he transcends the princess herself, that particular form, and he attaches himself to the upper realms. And this is taught as something that everyone can do. Right? It leads to the highest goal, to the goal of dveikut, of cleaving to God. And as with the lists of practices of Hanhagot that we saw before, the separation from the physical is a very important part of the process. That's the way you get to the higher goals. You know, when we talked about dveikut last year, those of you who were with me then, you know, there getting to dveikut was not so much about asceticism, about detaching yourself from physical desire. And that's certainly true in Hasidism, where it's like you attach to God through physical things. Right? So this, you know, is designed to lead us to an appreciation of and an attachment to the higher realms, some aspects of which we'll move into today. So, comments or questions here? Yes, Daniel.
I'm just confused about one line, because the storyline is he wants this woman, he can't have her, he withdraws from the world, he becomes an ascetic, and he becomes a better person and closer to God. That's the basic story. But there's a line, second to last line at the bottom. A man who does not desire a woman is like a donkey, or even less than one. That seems to me to be exactly the opposite of the message of the rest of the story. I don't understand what that means.
In other words, if you had no physical desires, how would you work from that level up to a higher level? Because if you have no physical things that you can detach yourself from, how do you apprehend the higher levels? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You nailed it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Glad I get to nail something once in a while. All right. Other comments or questions here? So you see why this is considered one of the classical texts. You know, we start out with this misunderstanding with, you know, that the goal is to physically attach himself to this royal and beautiful woman, and that somehow he thinks he's going to mate with her in the graveyard. But that misapprehension turns out to lead him to detach himself from all physical things. Strange, but that's how it is. Yes, Lou?
A lot of what we studied last year with stories similar to this, a princess or a king, we looked at as the princess in this case being being God or the Shekhinah, and not so much in physical terms, but in spiritual and metaphysical terms. Is this different, or is this the same? That the princess is really the higher level that we should, that this man wants to aspire to, and that the way to do that is to get away from some of the physical meanings?
Well, the answer to your question is yes and yes. So you know that in rabbinic teaching, parables about royalty are very instructional and very common, okay? Because it's about the King of Kings, right? So this is a slightly different order, because by attaching oneself to one's apprehension of a physical king, as if you could regard God as physical, right? Which is a mistaken apprehension, right? But by detaching oneself from other physical things, that brings you to raise yourself to a higher level. And so that becomes very common in mystical text. Does that answer your question, Lou?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, good. Francois.
I just want to say, Rabbi, that the whole thing makes sense, but I would like to just pinpoint that the location of the fact that being in a graveyard, okay, it helped him to arise to this level as well. The fact to know that everything physical in this world is really unimportant when someone dies. So it's kind of like it helped him with the process to reach this level.
Yes, that's a significant part of this, because the graveyard is where you go when you are totally detached from the physical. Okay? So this fellow is doing that and sort of making his home in the graveyard before he takes up permanent residence there. And yet he is taking up permanent residence there. That's how he becomes more detached from the physical. Okay, so now I want to go to our next unit. And let me just, take a second to pull up the texts that go from this. Right? If you remember the design of the Sphirot, those Sphirot, those emanations of God, suggest different levels of apprehension of God. Those are stages between our own existence down here and a higher reality up there. Many Kabbalists suggest that there is a lot more to know about God besides the 10 Sphirot. And they talk about four different worlds, and sometimes they talk about four different levels of soul. Right? So in the period immediately following the distribution of the Zohar in the 13th century, some Kabbalistic thinkers advanced this other model. And it's sort of pasted on top of the Sphirot, right? It doesn't deny the idea of the 10 Sphirot, but it's another way of looking at existence. It's not to replace the other model, but to add to it. And it taught the existence of four different worlds, four different dimensions. And here are the four different worlds. The top one is called Atzilut. Atzilut meaning emanation, right? That which comes forth of God's reality. The second level is called Bria. creation. You know the word borei, as in borei pri hagafen, God, or bereshit, right? Borei, bereshit bara Elohim, right? God, when God began to create. Right? So bria is the second level. The third level, yitzira, which means formation, the world of formation. And the fourth level, asiti, from the word oseh, which means to make. Asiyah is the noun form, making, right? Now, the bottom three of these are taken from this verse in Isaiah 43, our first text, which says, "Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the end of the earth, all who are linked to my name, whom I have barativ, whom I have created, yitzartiv, I have formed him, asitiv, I have made him for my glory." And then atzilut is way up there above those three, right? So there's the existence of four worlds, right? Now, in some models, each of those four worlds also contains a set of 10 sfirot. And the last sfira of one world is in the first of the next world down, right? So all these realms and all of reality is interconnected. You know, there are different models about how each of them links, but, you know, if you read different pieces of this stuff, you will see some of those models. One theory has the four worlds in between the actual 10 sfirot and our world down here. Another model has the 10 sfirot as the sfirot of the highest world, Olam Hayetzirah, the world of emanation. Okay? In some models, remember we used the term Adam Kadmon, the primeval man, right? Where, you know, the sfirot are kind of modeled on the body of the form of a human being. And in some models, this Adam Kadmon stands above all these four worlds. It's like the ultimate prototype, and everything and everyone else emanates from that. Now, this idea of four worlds also addresses the issue of how a spiritual, infinite being, God, right, can create this material, finite, decaying universe. Right? So my teacher, Dr. Byron Sherwin, Oliver Shalom, suggested that, you know, God's essence can be compared to concentrated orange juice. Right? Sounds a little like a blasphemous model, but hear it out. Right? What do you do with concentrated orange juice? You dilute it with water. Right? Now, no matter how much water you add, part of the mixture is orange juice. Right? You know, you could add, you know, to 1 can of concentrate, you could add 40 cans of water. And it's not going to seem like orange juice very much, but there's still that little bit of concentrate in there. Right? So in our apprehension, God is like that watered down concentrate. It's sometimes very hard to perceive God's essence, God's presence in the world as we experience it. But there's still a little piece of it there. Right? You know, no matter how much water you add, no matter how much of the physical world you add, the spiritual essence is still there. Right? God's reality is diluted into the material. So what that means is that in our apprehension of it, God is not all powerful, but part of his all powerful essence is still present, right? Even though it's kind of deteriorated, it's watered down, right? Now, what are we supposed to do with that? Well, we want to do certain things, certain holy deeds, and then we can ascend through the different realms in the four worlds. And the different levels of spirituality represented by those worlds can help us understand how sometimes we feel God's essence as being present, and sometimes, we don't apprehend it so much. Right? We might occasionally be able, through those holy deeds, to draw down more holiness into this world. We get more of that concentrate from God into our apprehension, right? Still going to be diluted. You're still not going to have, the undiluted sanctity, okay? But you get a taste of it. You get a feeling of it, right? As Dr. Yeshurun said, the model can also explain the presence of evil, because when you get that dilution of the holy, it's more vulnerable to materiality and to decay, and therefore to sin. Okay? Comments or questions up to here? Yes, Lou.
So the four levels of, I'll say, different sefirot, one above the other. The Shekhinah of one, the bottom one, is the Keter of the next, and they actually overlap as opposed to being just connected by some sort of spiritual movement.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. So let's take a look at our next text. Okay. From the Tikkunei HaZohar. We're going to take a look at a few texts that express the essential ideas about the four worlds. Right? So, blessed is he who clothes the king and the matronita with the 10 sefirot of Bria. Right? So, Bria is like, the second level of the four worlds. Right? For on Shabbat and festivals, he dons the garments of royalty, which are the 10 sefirot of Bria. And on weekdays, he dons the 10 groups of angels who serve the 10 sefirot of Bria. For the king is within the 10 sefirot of Atzilut, emanation. That's the highest level. He and his essence are one there. He and his life are one there. In other words, they're not diluted. They're not watered down. This is not the case with the 10 sefirot of Bria. They and their life are not one. They and their essence are not one. And the cause of all illumines the 10 sefirot of Atzilut and the 10 sefirot of Bria. And he illumines the 10 groups of angels and the 10 spheres in the firmament. He does not change anywhere. Okay? So the highest realm, the world of Atzilut, of emanation. And right, in that world, he and his essence are one. Right? There's no dilution. Right? And then comes the Olam Habariyah, the world of creation, and then the realms of the angels, and then the spheres in the firmament, the Asiyah, the world of making. Those are the material spheres below. That's where God's holiness gets even more diluted. Okay? Questions or comments here? Yes, Francois.
Okay, so I understand what you mentioned, but the question is, I thought first there's Ein Sof, and then you have the absolute and the
Yes,
rest.
the Ein Sof is the totally undiluted divine essence. And everything else flows forth from that. So the first world, Olam Ha'atzilut, the world of emanation, is just the beginning of that process.
Okay, okay.
Okay? That's as close to the Ein Sof as one can get.
I see.
Okay? Now,
Thank you.
what exactly the difference is between them? Well, there are different models of this, and I wouldn't, presume one way or the other about it. But that's as close to the divine essence as you get. Okay, other questions here? All right, let's move along. The third text, okay? He speaks about the upper mother who nests in the throne. We're going to see a little bit different model of the four worlds, right? So the upper mother is associated with the Sphira of Bina, right? So you're going to see that this reference here, the throne among the three upper Sphirot, right? Because Bina is the third Sphira, right? The central pillar, which comprises 6 Sphirot, nests in Metatron, right? So that's the complex of Sphirot around Tiferet, right? So those 6 Sphirot from 4 through 9. The lower mother nests in the wheel, right? So the wheel is just another code language, although the idea comes from Ezekiel chapter 1, that wheel that is found in the mystical vision of Ezekiel. But the wheel is just code language for the 10th Sphira, Malchut or Shekhinah. Right? And that one is the 10th Sphira is also regarded as feminine in nature, like the Sphira Bina. So the one is the upper mother, and Shekhinah is the lower mother. Right? Continuing. For from the throne came the Neshamot, that's highest level of soul. We'll talk about that later. And from the Chaya, the creature, comes the Ruchot. That's the next lowest level of soul. From the wheel, the Nefashot. That's like the physical being. So that's a lower level of soul still. And they are in these 3 worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. On Shabbat and festivals, there descend upon them Neshamot, Ruchot, and Nefashot by way of emanation, and they are the Holy Spirit from the 10 Sphirot. This is his way of saying how Shabbat enables us to experience a higher level of holiness because it comes from a higher world, from the world of Atzilut. Okay? So you have all these things that intersect with the traditional Kabbalistic understanding of the Sfirot. And then you get 3 levels of individual soul. The Nefesh is the lowest. That's just, the physical being. The Ruach, which in some models is like the emotional part of a human being. And then the Neshama, highest level of soul, that's the spiritual being, right? So Nefesh is like in the lowest world, the world of action. Ruach is in the next world up of Yetzirah. And then you have Neshama in the higher world of creation, the world of Bria. Okay? So we'll come back to all of these as we go along. Right? Comments or questions up to here? Everybody thoroughly confused? Yes, Francois.
Yeah, that's confusion. I just want to clarify one thing. When we say it's coming from a throne, from which throne? Which throne in this case?
Okay, so that's a great question. It can mean whatever, right? It doesn't have a fixed meaning. In this particular case, it refers to Shekhinah. Right? The wheel is associated with the 10th Sphira. Other questions or comments here? Okay. Next, we're going to take a look at a segment, or really a kind of a collection of different segments from this mystical book, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, this encyclopedic work, right? Isaiah Horowitz. So this is written after Tzvat, completed about 1630. So here is how he deals with the model of the 4 worlds. Right? Although the 10 utterances are the secret of the emanation of the Sfirot, the 10 utterances being, the idea that God created the world through 10 statements, right? So one of them is, let there be light. Right? Now, if you go through the text of the creation story, you'll find 9 different statements of, God created this and that. Okay? And the rabbis say that, when it says, Breshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God created, right? That is the first of the 10, right? So that altogether there are 10 statements, right? Although the 10 utterances are the secret of the emanation of the Sfirot, nevertheless, the root of the building of the world depends on 2 partsufim. Now, partsufim literally means faces, but it refers to the myth that the original human being was dual sexed. Right? Originally the human being was male on one side and female on the other. Okay? So picture a human being with 2 different sets of sexual organs, one like this and one like this, right? So because they are in one person, something has to be done, right? because, that's not the way the world is going to work. We know that. So God, instead of, the idea of, what the text says, that God took a rib from Adam, right? The word selah for rib can also mean bone. And so what did God do? He takes the bone that connects the two and just slices the human being, maybe not in an exact straight line, right? But like this. And thus they are divided into male and female. They are the du partsufim, the dual-faced original creation. Later, sliced into male and female. So that's the Kabbalistic myth. Actually originates in rabbinic teaching, but Kabbalists really build on it much more extensively. And they become associated with the two sfirot, the masculine Tiferet and the feminine Malchut. Yes, Daniel.
Okay. All right. I might be going back to class 1 on this. When the folks that wrote this wrote it, I assume that we're supposed to look at this very metaphorically, that man was created with two genders, two identities that were separated into two different bodies that became, and that humanity can, or an individual can access his other gender sometimes.
Yeah.
So is that a correct reading, or do they literally mean that God?
Well, let's put it this way. It is a correct reading. It is how I choose to read it. It's probably how most of you would want to read it. But that is not to say that there weren't Kabbalists who read it more literally. Okay? So now, you and I might say, well, isn't it good for men to be in touch with their feminine side and for women to have access to a more masculine side, a more assertive side, a more accumulating side, et cetera, whatever you associate with masculinity, right? I think that's a good way to look at it. And that's how I look at it. And I recommend that. But I have to also add the caveat that the Kabbalists themselves sometimes read it more literally. Okay?
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. No, thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't finding my mute button there.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions or comments before we go on? Okay. So for God made 6 days, what does that refer to? These are the 6 supernal days. The 6 extremities. Tiferet, that's associated with the 6 sfirot, which contains 6 sfirot that are its pride. And he quotes the very famous verse among Kabbalists from the book of Job. He says, from my flesh, I see God. Okay? It's a great verse. In other words, it's like, from the material, I understand the spiritual. Right? It is like the body, which has its 2 arms and 2 legs and the organ of generation, which bestows shefa, I mean the flow of energy to the Sphira Malchut. God is in his holy chamber, that is, the chamber of God which receives the influx and later empties it out below, bringing into existence the worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. In other words, the lower worlds. From the higher worlds, the flow of divine energy proceeds down to the lower worlds and to the rest of us. Okay? And then the Kabbalists gave Chokhmah and Bina the names father and mother, because they're again related as masculine and feminine Sfirot. Tiferet and Malchut, son and daughter, again, masculine, feminine. And from my flesh, I see God. From this model, I understand more about the divinity. The existence of the son comes from father and mother. In other words, Tiferet is created from the higher Sfirot. Before the son was revealed, he existed as part of the father in great concealment. That is, as the seed sent from the brain through the spinal cord and later most discernible as the embryo within the mother. Afterward, when he emerges from his mother's womb, he is revealed to all. Okay, so these physical terms provide a way to understand, even if it's metaphor or maybe it's not, the functioning of the higher levels. Right? Now, when it says the seed is sent from the brain to the spinal cord, that was what people believed in the medieval period, that the sperm from the father originated in the brain. Right? So, this is just according to the science of the day. Right? The seed itself is planted in great concealment. Right? The potential within the seed is there as part of the father before it is implanted within the mother. And then she gives birth and it is revealed to all. Right? And that's how the lower Sphirot and everything below them are formed. Okay? Questions or comments up to here? Okay.
Has that been contradicted? Because as a biologist, the sperm does not contain all the information for the newborn. Half of it comes from the mother.
Yes. Right.
So has that part of the Kabbalah been modified to reflect the reality of both parents contributing to the child?
Well, right. I mean, we have to accept science as science is today and not as it was in the 16th century.
Okay.
Right? So yeah, I mean, if you are a modern Kabbalist, you're going to adjust this a little bit. All right. But that doesn't change much about the model itself. Okay. And after all, it is understood that the seed, the result, is the result of the union from the father and the mother. Seed and egg. Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay, let's plow ahead a little bit. Okay. However, there is an even greater degree of concealment than this one. In the will, the thought to arouse the coupling. So this is something that goes even above the father and the mother, Chokhmah and Bina, right? That thought to arouse the coupling That comes from Keter, from the highest Sphira. We may say that the potential existence of the sun was inherent in this will in great concealment, right? Because you can never really apprehend Keter. It's just too far above us. Later, it was drawn from the brain through the father's power and bestowed upon the mother. Similarly, the two-part Sufim first existed in the secret of the will, the thought, in the secret of Keter, which is called will. As explained in Cordovero's book Pardes Rimonim, Keter is absolutely concealed, and Chokhmah is the beginning of revelation in comparison to the deep concealment. This beginning of revelation is revealed by Bina, and then Bina, nice little pun here, is Ben Yah, right? If you just add a yud in the middle of Bina, is Ben Yah, which means the Son of God, meaning Tiferet in its place, like the offspring of the higher Sfirot. In its place of reception is Malchut along with him. For the emanation of the six extremities into their place occurred by means of bestower and receiver, Chokhmah and Bina. In other words, Tiferet is created by Chokhmah and Bina. In the same way, when the extension of the six extremities above produced the world's Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, Tiferet bestows, Malchut receives this bestowal and actualizes it. Son and daughter are comparable to father and mother, except father and mother are responsible for revealing the emanation of the six extremities, and the effect, what is enacted by the Sfirot, is revealed by son and daughter. So let me stop at this point and ask for questions or thoughts here. Everybody following along so far? All right. With this introduction, you can understand how the four-letter name of God includes all of the divine emanation. Now, what does that mean? Well, the name of God is four letters, right? So the bottom Hey is associated with Shechina, the lowest of the Sfirot. The Vav, which is the sixth letter of the alphabet, is the sixth Sfirot in that complex around Tiferet. Above that are the Yud and the Hey, Chokhmah and Bina. Then Keter, which is in concealment, is like if you were to write a Yud with just a little jot at the edge of the Yud, which you can barely see it, if at all. But there's this little tiny jot at the top of the Yud. That represents Keter, right? So all of these are in great concealment, okay? So now, another fundamental still needs explanation. The Kabbalists, especially in Sefer HaPardes, that's Cordovero's Pardes Rimonim, on which Shnei Luchot HaBrit depends and quotes extensively. The Kabbalists have already discussed at length the linkage of the worlds, for the upper and the lower cleave together. The upper bestows upon the lower is a shadow of the upper. What is in one is in the other, even if the one below is material and the one above spiritual. They're never completely separated. It is always the case that one is parallel to the other. The entire Maaseh Bereshit, the work of creation, speaks of the lower worlds, but alludes to the higher worlds. For God, praised be he, brought all the worlds into existence, and all the worlds depend on his great light. Although the light is revealed in a much more refined way in a certain world than in another, that is due to the process of extension. However, everything is from his great light. I'll give you an example. He says, the light of the sun casts its light on the moon, and afterward the moon shines in the atmosphere of the world. From there, the light proceeds from the atmosphere of the world into a single room. The light progressively becomes coarsened because of the process of extension, but it is all one light, right? The reflection from the sun on the moon and then down to earth, right? It's all one light, but it's filtered. And so it is with the extension of the worlds, Atzilut, Briah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Okay? So again, this is more about the connection of the four worlds with the model of the Sphirot. Okay? Questions or comments up to here? Okay, let me go ahead with the continuation of this. And this is going. The next part is going to review some of what we've seen here. The higher world, the supernal world, and our world, they are, mirror images. The divine light might be, more diffused in this world. It might be more coarse, but it's still a reflection of the higher light. The secret of the world, he says, the secret of the world of Atzilut is that it is like a flame attached to the coal. It is not something separate from it. The source of the flame is in the coal, and in hovering over the coal, the flame is revealed, and it is tightly bound to it. Similarly, the world of Atzilut consists of rays from the coal, which were concealed in perfect unity within it. The light of emanation consists of supernal lights beyond comprehension. These lights were revealed in the secret of the verses from the creation story. Let there be light, and there was light. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters, etc. The secret alluded to by the hovering is the arising of the will to contract his light so that it could emanate. This does not change the emanator or the emanation. It doesn't change God. Right? This is the secret meaning of, and there was light. Meaning, say the sages, there was light already, but the light was completely concealed in its root and supernal source, as was said above. That is the secret of his divinity. The Ein Sof, the divine essence, is a soul to the soul of the Sphirot. They are the souls of everything that would later be brought into existence. The cause of causes is a soul to them, according to the secret of emanated divine existence. Right? So again, you have a lot of philosophical language in this, but the basic meaning of it is not so difficult. Last year, those of you who are with me, we studied a text from the Zohar, which talks about the mystical significance of a flame. Okay? And there, the world of emanation and what flows forward from it, that was treated like what was taught about the Sphirot. The original light of that flame is very mysterious, it's very hidden, and only when it reaches the lower worlds does it find some coarse substance to which it can connect. Again, it's diffused, like that concentrated orange juice. Right? It only takes on reality at that lower level, because that's where it can be apprehended. The light and the original power of Ein Sof still has an effect, but it gets diluted more as the power shifts to lower and lower levels. Okay? Let me stop and take questions here. Comments, questions? All right, then. We're going to leave it at that. We will not have class next week. My notes indicate that our next class is in 2 weeks, but you'll all get a note from our staff, and you'll get the exact details. Thank you again, Jennifer. Thank you all for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Shavua tov. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.